Hello, everyone. We welcome you to our webinar regarding the credit rating of Uzbekistan. First of all, we see many participants from many countries, including Central Asia, Germany, Russia. I see European Union. My name is Vladimir Gorchakov. I'm representative of RAEX-Europe. And I would like to mention today's speakers. So we have a presentation from Denis Anokhov from RAEX-Europe, so our rating agency. Then we have a presentation from Ilyas Manapov from Investment Promotion Agency of the Republic of Uzbekistan. Then from Mr. Kahora from the State Asset Management Agency of Uzbekistan. And then from two of our partners, Karen Serpiona from Avesta Investment Group and Andrei Shinkevich from Frontclear Management Company. But before starting the presentation, as usual, this webinar was supported by the General Consulate of Republic of Uzbekistan in Frankfurt am Main and personally by Mr. Nuriddin Mamajonov. Thank you very much, Nuriddin, as usual, for this support and hope for further cooperation. And you are welcome for a brief a welcome speech. This speech will be in German, so for our German audience will be nice, but then we will have translation of this speech to English and to Russian for all participants. So microphone is yours, so you can unmute, Nuriddin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. Thank you very much, dear guests. Herzlichen Dank. Zunächst einmal, ich wollte Dankeschön sagen an alle Teilnehmer, die heute dabei sind und für die Organisation, Vladimir, für die Organisation von RAEX, Ratingagentur, das unterstützt Usbekistan und usbekische diese Rating schon lange Zeit. Und ich wollte natürlich im Namen vom Generalkonsulat begrüßen alle Teilnehmer heutige, insbesondere aus Usbekistan, aus Deutschland, aus anderen Ländern. Und es ist mir eine große Ehre, natürlich heute dabei zu sein und die Vertreter von Usbekistan, Deutschland und anderen Ländern zu begrüßen auf diesen Plattform. Und kurz natürlich über den heutigen Zustand der weitere Entwicklung der Wirtschaft der Republik Usbekistan bekannt zu machen. Und meine Damen und Herren, die globale Pandemie Covid-19 hat uns deutlich gemacht, dass die stabile Entwicklung der Länder abhängig von vielen Faktoren und Richtungen ist. Die heutige Situation hat uns gezeigt, dass unsere Zusammenarbeit und uneingeschränkte Kooperation in verschiedenen Bereichen sind sehr wichtig für die weitere Behaltung unserer Wirtschaft auf aller Ebenen. Und um jede Krise zu überwinden, nicht nur auf nationaler Ebene, auf internationaler Ebene, wir müssen unbedingt zusammenbleiben und zusammen kooperieren. Und ich hoffe, heutige Präsentation, unsere Veranstaltung und Plattform in Form Dialogs wird uns ermöglichen, Meinungen und Vorschläge zur baldigen Überwindung der negative Wirksamkeit von Pandemie behilflich zu sein und unsere Wirtschaft weiter zu unterstützen. Ich bin sicher, dass meine Damen und Herren, dass heutige Sie kriegen eine gute Möglichkeit von usbekischen Experten von verschiedenen Ebenen entsprechende Antworten auf Ihre Frage behalten. Nicht nur von Wirtschaft, von Bankensektoren, von anderen Stadtaktiven und so weiter. Es wird ermöglicht für Sie. Und seitens des Generalkonsulats und allgemein diplomatische Vertretungen von Usbekistan in Deutschland, meine Damen und Herren, wir sind immer bereit, Sie allseitig zu unterstützen, bei Ihren vorteilhaften Unternehmungen und Projekten mit Usbekistan, mit usbekischen Partnern voll zu unterstützen. Ich wünsche der Arbeit des heutigen Dialogs und der Veranstaltung viel Erfolg und ich wollte nochmal bedanken mich bei Herr Gortschakow, bei Frau Grishankova und bei allen Teilnehmern für die Unterstützung, für die Organisation der heutigen Veranstaltung. Und ich wollte nur kurz betonen über meine Kollegen aus Brüssel, Uzbek Shaikhov, der Vertreter und Gründer der Euro-Us. Er ist auch dabei und vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Nuriddin. So don't be afraid, all participants. The rest of the webinar will be in English. So who's not familiar with German, thank you again. So I remind you, so every speaker has up to 15 minutes, including 15, including Q&A part. And at the end, if we have questions, so we have the general Q&A part. And if you would like to ask some questions in advance, please put them on the chat. So saying that, I would like to give a microphone to my colleague, Denis Anokhov, who is now the responsible expert for the credit rating of Uzbekistan. Denis, you are welcome.
Thank you, Vladimir. Hello, everyone. So at first, traditionally, I would like to introduce our rating agency. 1 second, I will share my screen. Yeah, it's okay. So, RAEX-Europe is in Frankfurt since 2013. We are registered by European Security and Market Authority, and our ratings are comparable with the ratings of other credit rating agencies. We assign credit ratings for financial and non-financial institutions, also non-credit ratings, namely ESG ratings and green bond second opinion. As well, we provide industry and economic research and organize business events. And let us now turn to the credit rating. Today we have many interesting speakers, and I will focus mostly on the most important factors that influenced our decision. And on the 4th of September, RAEX-Europe revised the credit rating of Uzbekistan and confirmed it at BB-, which means sufficient level of creditworthiness of the government. And despite the negative impact of COVID-19, we didn't change the stable outlook, and our decision is supported by a number of positive factors, which I will start with. So, despite the decline in the global economy and slowdown, as well as slowdown in neighboring countries and the European Union, we see that the growth of Uzbekistan economy remains, and however, it was significantly revised by us to a lower rate from 5.5% to 1.5% in 2020. As a result of COVID-19 and the rapid lockdown measures implemented in March by the government, real GDP growth slowed to almost 0% in the first half of this year. And the nationwide quarantine had a strong impact on the transport, tourism, and the retail sectors. The industrial production in Uzbekistan decreased in the first half of the year, while we saw positive dynamics in agriculture and construction. As a response, the government urgently amended the budget by increasing expenditures and introducing tax relief for businesses. And we expect a subsequent recovery of GDP growth to 5–6% in 2021. However, recent uncertainty around second wave of the pandemic and further restrictive measures would negatively affect our base case scenario. So the stability of the banking system of Uzbekistan supports our credit ratings. Due to significant capital injections and the transfer of foreign currency loans to the Uzbek Fund of Reconstruction and Development, the capital adequacy ratio of the banking sector has exceeded 20% last year, and the growth of lending is continuing in the country. The banks also show profitability with the ROA above 2%, and since the beginning of this year, there have been a positive dynamic in the cost-to-income ratio, both due to the growth of interest margin of banks and non-interest income. The central bank introduced preventive measures to support liquidity of banks through repo and swap operations, and as well as softened reserve requirements. And at the same time, the quality of banks' assets worsening. Since the beginning of this year, the level of NPLs has grown to almost 3%. Stress tests of the central banks show that the share of NPLs may increase by several times this year, which increase the risk of materialization of contingent liabilities for the government. Also, the central bank recommends banks to amend the terms of loans and granting the grace period and loans holidays until the 1st of October 2020. The next positive factor is the acceptable level of the public debt of Uzbekistan. In 2020, the government debt continues to grow, exceeding 31% of GDP. The authorities to finance anti-pandemic measures, increasing borrowings on the domestic market of government bonds, and also they reach an agreement with international financial institutions, which together can provide almost about $1.7 billion to support the Uzbekistan. These urgent borrowings will increase public debt to 35% of GDP in 2020. However, we consider that this level of debt is acceptable and not to add additional risks for the country's creditworthiness. Moreover, most of the debt, as you see on the right chart, consists of long-term concessional agreements with the foreign governments and as well as with international financial institutions. So let's move to the restricting factors. And as the main source, and we will continue with the government debt, as the main source of financing are external financing, the foreign currency prevails in the debt structure, almost 100%, as you see on the left chart. This makes the debt position sensitive to exchange rate fluctuations. And after a sharp depreciation of Uzbek som in April 2020, the national currency continued to weaken, and it leads to increase of debt burden. The government also still have few instruments for diversification of the debt position. The share of domestic bond on the local market is still insignificant and is limited by the weak domestic capital market. We also anticipate the additional pressure on the national currency stem from the deterioration of external position. As you see on the right chart, the mix of weaker export, mainly for natural gas, and stable import and high external borrowings create additional pressure on the current account. And we anticipate the current account deficit will increase to 10% of GDP. And additionally, the external position is highly dependent on remittances, which is showing a slowdown due to the contraction of main labor markets for Uzbekistan, namely Russia and Kazakhstan. In this regard, we also expect that unemployment rate in Uzbekistan will rise further sharply above 10%. It's also a restricting factor for Uzbekistan. As I mentioned before, the banking system is stable and is growing actively. However, the ratio of banking system assets and domestic loans to GDP at the beginning of this year remains at moderate levels. And the role of the finance sector for the economy is limited due to the high concentration on the state-owned banks. They represent 85% of sector assets, as well as a still significant share of policy lending to state-owned enterprises. And reduction of system risks of the banking sector is possible if the government will continue privatization and avoid the preferential lending. As we mentioned, the government increased budget expenditures to support the COVID-19 related healthcare and social needs. And you see that the government also launched anti-crisis fund of around $1 billion, 2% of GDP. But this this expenditure will be covered by injections from international financial institutions. Consequently, because of these expenditures, we anticipate that the overall fiscal deficit will be widened to almost 6% this year, but the government will cover this deficit with mainly with external financing. And authorities continues to improve and the quality and transparency of the monetary policy within the transition to inflation targeting and free float exchange rate regimes. In 2020, the new policy instruments were introduced, namely new policy rate, key rate, and as well as short-term liquidity instruments for banking sector. Also, given the low projected inflation this year, the central bank has cut this year the key rate twice from 16 to 14%. On the other side, a number of factors which is the high level of financial dollarization and underdeveloped domestic capital markets, they still restrain the effectiveness of monetary policy. The annual inflation rate was high in 2019 at 15%. However, this year, given the slowdown of and weaker demand, we observe downward trend in inflation. And this, as I said, the central bank has lowered the forecast for inflation. We expect that inflation will be within 12.5, 13% this year, and will depend on the further development of this situation around COVID-19. And next negative factor for the Uzbekistan is the low level of GDP per capita. Despite a gradual improvement and progress over the last years, the GDP per capita remains very high and very low, in global terms and among regional peers. So we are very shortly with the next negative factors. Despite the recent reforms, the institutional development of Uzbekistan is still restrained by corruption and various legislative barriers. However, Uzbekistan progressed in the World Bank Easy of Doing Business ranking, climbing to the 69th position. And also the country's capital market remains underdeveloped, evidenced by the low market capitalization on the national stock exchange. Currently, there are some signs of revival. We see the increase in the number of market participants, but the capital market is still weak. And also, we take it into account in our credit rating the stress factor of Uzbekistan. Despite the decline of foreign currency lending, the level of financialization of the economy is still high, 44% of deposits and 50% of loans. The currency risk significantly limits the effectiveness of monetary policy. And I want to finish with our outlook. The stable outlook on the rating reflects our expectation about negative and positive factors. And shortly, among positive factors are faster than expected recovery of the global economy, continuation of the structural reforms of the government, and improvement of the monetary policy. And among negative factors which could lead to a downgrade of our ratings, there are continued lockdown measures related to COVID-19, deterioration of the stance of the banking system, and higher than expected increase of the government debt and deficit metrics. And we will keep monitoring the situation, and the next our rating action for Uzbekistan will be in March 2021. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Denis. We need to go further, but before that, I just would like to announce that the next sovereign region is Georgia, and basically before that, already next week, 23rd of September 2020, we have very interesting webinar about the sustainable finance in Georgia within the series of our webinars for sustainable finance. Everyone who is interested in sustainable development, SDG goals, and the Georgia market specifically, you're welcome to this webinar. I will send the link to the chat. So saying that, I would like to invite the next speaker, Ilyas Manapov from Investment Promotion Agency under the Ministry of Investments of Foreign Trade of the Republic of Uzbekistan. As I understand, the foreign investments in Uzbekistan even increased over the first half year 2020. That's figures we saw. However, we guess there is some obstacles for their foreign investors now due to the pandemic. So Ilyas, microphone is yours. You can share the presentation and you're welcome.
Okay, thank you very much, Vladimir. Good morning, everyone. I would like to share some information about investment policy of Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan is a resource-rich, double-landlocked country, strategically located in the heart of the Central Asia. The nominal GDP per capita in Uzbekistan was last recorded at 60 billion US dollar, with 297 billion purchasing power parity. Currently, the Republic's economy is the second fastest growing in the CIS, with an indicator of 5.5%. According to the Asian Development Bank, GDP growth in 2020 and 2021 will be about 6%. In 2020, Uzbekistan entered the top 20 countries in the world that achieved the great results in improving the business environment. It's worth noting that the doing business 2012 ranking, Uzbekistan was in 166th place, an increase of 97 position. The government creating great reforms in improving investment climate of Uzbekistan. The policy of liberalization, a mandatory sale of foreign exchange earning, and new market mechanism for the information of the exchange rate initiated by government are key reforms that could be mentioned in order to attract new investors. At the same time, legal policies are subject to change with new laws that protect investors on legal level. Uzbekistan takes a possible measure to improve conditions for foreign investors, providing guarantees of their activity and protection for nationalization and expropriation. Those one of the most significant steps of the Republic in this direction was recent adoption the new law on investment and investment activities. This law is somewhat of breakthrough for the Uzbekistan in the field of legal regulation of investment activities and investments. At the same time, government pushing power on improvement of investment climate. Investors could obtain a residence permit in 10 years. Through investing in Uzbekistan amount of 3 million US dollar, or get investment visa for 3 years for investment of $200,000. Last but not least, it's important to mention that Uzbekistan has adopted a new tax code with lots of new detailed transfer pricing regulation. In the presented project, in accordance with the concept of for improving the tax policy of Republic of Uzbekistan, the application of tax legislation has been simplified as much as possible. For example, cancel the taxation of losses on the sale of goods, works, services below cost. Over the past 2 years, large-scale reforms have been carried out in the tax system. The rates of the single tax payment, what property tax, social payment have been reduced. A flat taxation scale has been introduced for personal income, and some types of taxes and obligatory payments have been cancelled. And moreover, the VAT rate has been reduced from 20% to 15%. In the next slide, tax benefits are provided for amount of direct private foreign investment. From 300,000 US dollar to 3 million US dollar. It's give for a period 3 years. Our 3 millions to 10 millions is give 5 years, and our 10 millions US dollars is give for 7 years. To actively attract foreign capital, there are currently tax and custom initiatives. 21 free economic zones, for example, 7 pharmaceuticals, 12 industrial, 1 agriculture, and 1 tourism. A business ombudsman institution has been introduced as a Tashkent International Arbitration Center has been established, and draft unified law on investment have been developed and investment activity. According to World Bank forecast, the global economy will shrink by 5.2% this year. That would represent the deepest recession since the Second World War, with a large fraction of economies expressing declines in per capita out since 1870. The World Bank says in its June 2020 global economic prospects. Undertaken measure in Uzbekistan during pandemic. Established in anti-crisis fund in amount 1 billion US and 355 million of which are already invested. 12 decrease of present was significant in order to support for business and the population. Planned to attract 3.4 billion to external funding to contain the pandemic and support the economy recovery. And 230 million of tax privileges were granted to industry. In the first quarter, the economy of Uzbekistan grew by 4.1% and 1.7 billion of FDI were attracted. GDP growth of Uzbekistan is expected at the level of 1.5% in 2020 and about 6.57% in 2021. And the foreign economic policy concept to improve the business environment and create favorable conditions for carrying out entrepreneurial activity, improving customs, construction of infrastructure for 25 million US dollar investment projects is planned to be carried out as expensive of the state budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilyas. So we have several questions already from the chat. So one question I would like to postpone to Q&A part regarding the shares of local companies. Can the non-resident investors buy these shares? Because we have then Mr. Kahorov use presentation about the state asset management, and also Mr. Serpionov from Avesta Investment Group. He will definitely focus on this topic as well. I remember this question, but Ilyas, can you share us with information regarding the long-term visa for foreign investors in Uzbekistan? What's the status quo now for long-term visa to Uzbekistan for foreigners, especially from the European Union?
Long visa, yes. As I said, that if you investor could obtain residence or maybe investment visa. For example, if depend on amount of how many invest to our country. For example, if some investor want to get some investment visa, for example, if he investment 200,000 US dollar, he get for 3 years investment visa, and it's depend or maybe he if amount many for example investment over 3 amount 3 million US dollar, he get 10 years investment visa.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope you will share us with presentation with your contacts. It's, if somebody from the foreign investors would like to go further with this question, you can support them, yeah?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also the question about the transferring of foreign currency. So basically, for many years, there is were limitations for the transferring from Uzbek soms to US dollars and vice versa. And now the central bank and the country itself going further to the relaxation of the currency restrictions. So basically, could you briefly outline the status quo of transferring of local currency to the US dollars and vice versa? So if you don't have the direct answer, we can yeah, we can ask another speaker for sure.
Yes, thank you for interesting questions. Yes, it wasn't a restriction of 25%, but right now there is no restrictions.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I just remind that we have several speakers who will also share their knowledge and their opinion regarding the topic of FX risks, as I understand, and regarding the buying shares. And the last question I see here for this part is basically the some exceptions for different kind of businesses. So I guess this is general question about that. There is a government-owned companies and private companies, and they might have a different status, but these structural reforms should lift this, let's say, arbitrage for different legal entities. So could you comment on this as well? Okay, Ilyas, yeah.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
So the question is about the exceptions for some type of businesses, I guess mostly government owned, so that they have access to some tax relaxations and directed lending. So if you can comment on it, this would be great. Or let us know where should we check this.
As I said, by government take a new tax code is, for example, is reduced. For example, the weight what rate has been reduced from 20% to 15%. As you see, as you saw in my presentation, I can show again about the tax.
No, yeah, it's fine. I mean, if some other speakers can answer this question at the end, we will have the normal Q&A part after all presentation. Again, thank you very much, Ilyas, for all your presentation, and I hope you will share it with us with also your contacts, and people can ask you questions directly. But I would like to already go to the next speaker, Mr. Kahora from the State Asset Management Agency of Uzbekistan. And Azizon, you're welcome to tell us about the current privatization plans and how it is going on. So Azizon, the microphone is yours.
Yes. You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your presentation.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. Another one time, and I want to share with you some data, our opinion on the review of the current privatization policy of the Republic of Uzbekistan. So as you can see, right now the state presence in economy of Uzbekistan is about 55%. We are doing privatization almost for almost 30 years, but the high indicator of state presence is we have today, and average indicator of the state presence in other market economies is about 20-25%. And I can briefly talk about the main results of the privatization that took place in recent years. In general, we have sold more than 35,000 state assets. The housing assets, domestic sphere, many public services, trade, and other sectors were completely transferred to private sector. Different methods of the privatization were used, and in particular, the labor collectives were actively involved in transformation of SOEs. Mainly, they held up to 25% of the authorized capital, charter capital of the state-owned enterprises. But as a result of capitalization and other factors, nowadays the share of the collectives, trade, labor collectives are very tiny now. So today we are intending to reduction of the state participation in the economy. So the most important thing is not to repeat the mistakes, not only of our own, but also mistakes of other countries. So in this context, I would like to highlight some of the reasons that led to the current, maybe not the best results of the privatization in the Republic of Uzbekistan. So first of all, there was no specific criteria established for the privatization of state-owned enterprises or for keeping them in the state ownership. This was due to the lack of the state policy on the management of state assets. The second was various privatization programs were adopted in Uzbekistan, and many of them include only state-owned real estate objects, not living state-owned enterprises. State assets of enterprises of basic industries such as energy complex, transport, chemical, mining, metallurgy, and banking, telecommunications were not offered to the investors. And as a rule, in many enterprises, we have offered very tiny shares. So it was not a control stake in enterprises. So there was no high interest from the by the investors. So the third was there were some cases of to revise the results of privatization, and it says that the work which we have done on guarantee and protecting of the right of investors were not sufficient in our privatization history. And the fourth factor was industrial policy of Uzbekistan provided for the organization and management of enterprises, state-owned enterprises in most industries through industrial associations and state holding companies. So we have created many of state holdings, state associations. In fact, they are they run their activity as ministries. So as quasi-governmental organizations, they have damaged to the private sector development, competitive markets, and economic efficiency. So the fifth factor was insufficient attention was paid to the development of financial market. You know, our capital market is very, very tiny. So the many enterprises, including state-owned enterprises, could not raise the capital in our capital market. So today we have to do privatization because the analysis shows that among about 3,000 state-owned enterprises, only about 1,000, so 1/3 of them paid dividends, and the indicator ROE, return on equity, in state-owned enterprises overall is about 6%, and you can see that the inflation rate in our country is about 15 or 16%. So it's in comparison with the inflation rate is very, very low. And the indicator ROE, return on assets, is only about 2%. So
As a result of, so I see your slides is not moving. So can you check? Okay, great. Thank you.
So you can see that, for example, current privatization programs or many number of presidential decrees, decrees of cabinet ministries, cabinet of ministers conduct some privatization process. So, for example, in oil and gas industry, in alcohol production, in oil and fat industry, production of construction materials, we have some assets to offer to the investors, but some kind of let's say strategic enterprises, SOEs, are not included in the current privatization program. Such kind of Uzbekistan Railways, Uzbekistan auto industry, many of commercial banks, Uzbekistan Airways, some of chemical industry enterprises are going on remain in a state ownership. So, what is the current situation? We have about 3,000 state-owned enterprises, and they provide 55% of GDP, about 50% of budget revenues, and 6% of employment. So 9% of all state-owned enterprises are as a joint stock companies. About 60% of them are state unitary enterprises, and 33% is as a LLC. So now we are planning a big privatization program. During the privatization of production enterprises, the main emphasis will be on finding a new owner who will be able to modernize production, create new jobs, and organize the production of competitive products. To achieve this goal, first of all, we will do in all state-owned enterprises pre-sale preparation of these enterprises. So a number of measures will be organized to improve them, to restructure and increase investment attractiveness of these SOEs. Now State Assets Management Agency, together with some IFIs, especially European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, developed 3 new laws. The first law is on privatization, because our current law was adopted about 30 years ago. So we are developing a new law on privatization, which will be very simply and understandable to our foreign partners. And the second law is on state assets management, and the third one is on insolvency of enterprises. And together with these IFIs, we have developed a draft program for the privatization of state assets for 2020 and 25 years, which provides for a reduction in the number of SOEs from the current about 3,000 to the about 600. Based on individual approach to each object of privatization, enterprises we can divide into 3 parts. The first is very tiny and small enterprises, which will be privatized by so-called electronic platform is auction. So they don't need to do some restructuring or some improving corporate governance or etc. And the second category is some liquid, highly liquid and large enterprises. We will sell them with some preparation. So we will do the evaluation of these enterprises and some preparation works. And the third is a list of enterprises to be implemented with the involvement of local and international consultants and experts who will conduct pre-sale preparation, increase investment attractiveness, introduce modern corporate governance methods, and we will do with them some restructuring and other measures to provide their successful operation. So the third category of the enterprises, which are large state-owned enterprises, may be of interest to strategic investors. For example, such SOEs as who are producers of mineral fertilizers such as Navai Azot, Fergana Azot, will be offered to the foreign partners. So I must draw your attention to new approach to the privatization. So a new investment company, Uz Assets, was established in June of this year in accordance with the resolution of Cabinet of Ministers. So in the first phase, the 9 assets, including some of national champions as joint stock company Quartz, joint stock company Kızılkum Cement, and 3 of alcoholic producers, 2 engineering companies, insurance company Kafalat, and some of other assets were transferred to the investment company Uz Assets. The main task of this investment company is the transformation of state-owned enterprises into competitive enterprises by analyzing their activities based on criteria of international practice and introducing modern management methods and selling them to potential investors while ensuring investment attractiveness. So we are planning to do some roadshow programs for targeted audiences. So this company will be a kind of laboratory for us because we are doing the privatization of such kind of big assets for the first time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kahor. That was a great presentation. Thank you for your time. And we have many questions to you, but as for now, I would like to postpone it to the Q&A part in the end. I noticed all of them. And now I would like to invite Mr. Serpionov. Karen, thank you very much for answering part of our questions during the chat because you're the market practitioner. Karen, can you, join?
Vladimir, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you very much for your Telegram channel, Investor Group, where actually I would recommend to all foreign investors to read it in English and quite good. And during your presentation, could you touch the topic of the shares buying on the listing companies and also regarding the capital controls, since you are basically doing this consultancy permanently? Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thank you, Vladimir, for the invitation. I will try to briefly go through the possible options for equity investors in Uzbekistan. So how investors could touch this market. So first of all, let's try to see what's going on listed equities. It's mostly for portfolio investors because, as you could see, the turnover is very small. It's only $13.2 million for the last 8 months. And if we go very conservatively, if we exclude some M&A transaction or increasing of the capital of the banks, which is done by the current shareholders, so the real retail turnover is about $200,000 for 8 months. So it's practically nothing. Definitely the turnover is decreased comparing to the last year, but it's still very small. So regarding the valuation, as you could see, I made the 2 graphs of the price to equity and price to earnings, and price to book value among most tradable banks. And this blue market area is probably the names of the companies which is most popular among investors, foreigners and locals. So as you could see, the such banks as like a Hamkor Bank or Ipatuli Bank, they are very attractive. The price to earnings is at the level of 2 annual profits, and they are growing by 50–40% a year. And the book ratio is much lower than 1 book. If we are going to look on state-owned banks, which is mostly outside the blue area. First of all, it's the largest bank on a top on the right side, bottom right. It's SQBN. It's Uzbekistan, which was the first bank issued the euro bonds and recently attracted the few credit lines from the China, from the Eaton Vance. So it's like a leader of the international market. So everyone, I guess, interested in this company. So as you can see, it's the largest bank which is traded on a stock exchange, and their ratios are quite comparable with the private banks. Rest state-owned banks, liquidity on them are very low. So, and I think the real rate should be much lower. As you can see, Agro Bank and Microcredit Bank are on a very top by price to earnings ratio. But I could say that liquidity on Microcredit Bank is about $200 for last 8 months. So nobody is not touching these shares. So definitely most actively traded banks among state-owned is Ipoteka and Ustanat Kurilish Bank. And everyone else are very small amounts are available, but I want to mention that Turon Bank and Aloka Bank are in a blue zone. So if there will be some liquidity, I guess there could be an interest from the investors. Secondly, let's take a look on the last M&A transactions, and the new names are coming to the market. And when I'm talking about the last transactions, let's say it's the last 2 years, because the time goes very slow in Uzbekistan in this area. So the two new names is both online or digital banks. They're positioning like this. It's a Georgian TBC and local bank, Anor Bank. They just got the license a couple of weeks ago. I already have the plastic cards from TBC, so they are very active. I want to check what will be the difference in quality between international player and local ones. So I hope the increase in competition will push the local banks to go for additional capital to attract new technologies to start to compete on a retail market segment. And I market the few operations which we could call as M&A on the market. So the recent one is the German Development Bank and Triodos Investment Management bought about quarter of the Ipakuli Bank. It was just 10 days ago. So as you could see, the valuation is very good. It's below book value and about 3.1 expected profits. So the bank is growing, the good transaction for investors and the bank, I guess. And after this, Ipakuli Bank announced also the attraction of the new credit line. So their capital adequacy ratio improved. So they will be probably able to attract additional 200 million of loans and grow very fast. And also the Hamkor Bank about 2 years ago attracted, it's not a primary market, it's a secondary market. Responsibility Investments bought half of the shares which was owned by the International Financial Corporation at a bit higher valuation, 1.2 book value and 5 EPS. But Hamkor Bank is growing very fast, so now I guess it's about the same which GG and Triodos paid for Ipakuli. After this deal, there was a couple of additional operations on lower ratios. Bank is increasing the equity, but they are not on international market yet. I hope they will do. So as you could see, the DEG Triodos responsibility. So Uzbekistan banks are like German and Central European investors. So I guess we are in a proper place to discuss this. And on the other side, I'm mentioning one local transaction. So the Capital Bank, sort of the bank was sold on very low valuations. So I guess if you want to touch the market, you definitely should look on a two transaction on the left part of the screen with international players. So this is the, I guess, proper valuation. And after the good news, I want to come to the to the negative side. So definitely why there's not so many foreigners on the market is that we have a very tough regulation in the banking sphere. Who could own, how could own the banking shares? So after long years of the full ban on foreign investors in the banks, we got the permission to invest foreigners to buy up to 5% of the local banks without any preliminary confirmations or approvals from the central bank. But it's connected with some additional limits. So anyone from the most popular offshore jurisdictions cannot invest. So the most of the funds are off the limits. BVI, Cayman, Hong Kong, whatever, most of them are in a list of the offshores according to Uzbek legislation, and they cannot touch the market. If so we wanted to use the option that if such company create the SPV in a non-offshore jurisdiction, they could buy. But after the change of the law on the banks in November last year, this option is also closed. Also, local companies could not have the banking shares if the foreigners own more than 50% of the equity of this company. Also, financial investors, except the IFIs and strategic investors like banks or other credit institutions, cannot own more than 50. It's a misprint in my presentation. It's a 50. So if you are not a bank, if you are not the financial institution, you cannot own more than 50% of the bank. So among popular jurisdictions which could be incorporated for the investments into the Uzbek banks are Luxembourg, Singapore, Scotland. So if you are, let's say, German citizen with a company in Luxembourg, you're welcome to invest up to 5% of the equity in Uzbek banks. So I hope this will change. I don't know, Vladimir, if we have the central bank representative here. So I very difficult for me to answer why is this limitation is introduced, and I hope that such public discussions with foreign investors, with local authorities will help to change this situation, because I believe that the banks in Uzbekistan are growing fast. It's a huge potential in this sphere, and definitely it's worth to attract foreign investors in the sector. Thank you. I hope I didn't take so much time and I will be able to ask the questions.
Thank you very much, Karen. This was great. So we are almost on time. And I hope for the next webinars, we will have the Central Bank of Uzbekistan for sure, and they can comment on it. And also, I just remind to all participants to stay online because at the end, we will definitely have the Q&A part, because there are some questions left to the state asset management, and I hope some questions will be to the Avesta group. But before going to Q&A, I would like to also welcome Andrei Shinkevich from Front Clear management company. So as I understand, the company is specializing on money market developments and has some actually practical solutions for people investing and operating on the emerging markets such as Uzbekistan. So Andrei, I hope you can share now your presentation with us. Microphone is yours. Can you unmute, Andrei? Yeah,
yes.
Great.
A little bit. Give me a second to. Can you see my shared screen now? Or not?
We can.
You can, yeah. Okay,
yeah.
Good. Good morning and afternoon, everybody, and thank you to RAEX for inviting me. I represent a company called Front Clear based in Amsterdam, and we are solely devoted to money market. money market is really the market where banks transact with each other, as I'll explain. And we are funded by various development financial institutions, which I'm sure many of you know in the context of other transactions and other investments in Uzbekistan. So maybe let me say a couple of words why we believe money markets are really central. They're central to functioning financial systems and really support economic growth. It may seem to be a little bit obscure from, major goal of investment and development, but really money markets, specifically banks lending to each other and swap markets, they're really important because they allow really to do two important things. One is really liquidity and maturity transformation for Uzbekistani banks. Banks which have high access to deposits and excess liquidity, but don't have enough opportunities for lending can lend those on the money markets to other banks. It allows banks really to manage asset liability management, which at the end of the day means responsible lending to real sector clients, right? So we want at the end of the day, Uzbekistani banks to be able to lend at the right maturity and the right currency, really. And that of course depends on the ability to do asset liability management. It's important to stress that secured money markets, so in a repo format where banks lend each other against government bonds, is a lot more stable and inclusive than unsecured. So the money markets where there is only clean lending, typically there is a club of top banks or top rated banks which are not afraid to lend to each other. Whereas if they are protected with government bonds on a repo basis, then typically all banks in the country can really join the club. And the global financial crisis also resulted in the fact that secured money market became much more prominent. And definitely for overall development of financial sector, money market is important to setting the benchmark rate. At some point in Uzbekistan, there will be accepted floating rate and floating rate lending such as LIBOR or its successors in a developed world. But in order for that to function, of course, we need a swap market. The monetary policy transmission, which also has been discussed, whether it is weak or strong in Uzbekistan, it depends on dollarization, but it also depends on the money markets because the short-term rates needs to transform into longer-term ranging between banks into lending and deposit rates. And at the end of the day, the two important derivatives that needs to be developed really for maturity transformations, interest rate swaps, fixed to floating, and cross-currency swaps such as USD, USD for currency transformation. And again, to result in a more responsible asset liability management and more responsible lending to real sector clients. So the building of money markets is not an entirely easy job. It really actually touches a lot of things in the financial sector, which also, of course, facilitates generally capital market development. But some of the things I will not mention all of them, but some of the things is typically derivatives and repos and similar transactions have to work under certain documentation called ISDA and GMRA, and enforceability of this documentation is often problematic. The trading and settlement systems are important. I mean, of course, the way how the central bank works, conducts monetary policy is important. Prudential regulations, if there is something prohibitive about using bonds on a repos or about using derivatives or how the open position is calculated for banks, this may be positive or negative towards really development of money markets. Now, frankly, I have not really closed the transaction yet in Uzbekistan, but we are actually quite close to doing one, and we have done quite some due diligence. And this is, for example, of some of the things we expect to be a bit problematic that we would like to try to work on. So one of them is actually whether netting, so-called netting of obligations, or if in a swap, typically one party owns one leg of a swap to another and vice versa. So whether these obligations are netted and considered to be one single debt or multiple transaction is very important, and it goes across all countries. Obviously, for repo markets to develop, which I was mentioning is more stable and secure, there should be government bonds, and they should be not just because, you know, we want to have them to do these repos. There should be government bonds because banks are typically used to invest liquidity in it. And as of now, it seems to be there is a lack of them. Yeah, there is not so much local government debt, as I think original credit presentation was mentioning, and those banks that have it may be already used in central bank operations. So overall, there is clearly a lack. But even if there are bonds, it is also a question whether those bonds can be efficiently used in repo transactions, and particularly with foreigners, whether you can really do repos against those bonds. So, for example, the first thing that comes to mind is that, you know, the government bonds are stored in Uzbekistan currency exchange, but whether really the foreigners can open account is highly questionable. That's the first point. And the second is for these transactions to be efficient, they need to be not just pledged, but really moved on so-called title transfer basis, where, for example, Uzbek banks give it to a foreign party as a complete legal transfer of title, but retains economic ownership. So the Uzbekistani bank still doesn't use any benefits from the bonds. It still receives all the coupons. If the foreign parties is now owner of record, of course, it receives the coupons first from the Uzbekistani government as owner of government bonds, but then the foreign party passes it back according to those Eastern GMRA agreement. So now for all that to happen, actually, you know, it should be possible to do so-called free of payment transfer between different custody accounts, should have custody accounts. It has to be efficient, relatively transaction-free, and do not create tax or accounting or any other problems. So that's kind of, you know, first set of snapshot issues, perhaps hindering money market development of Uzbekistan that we are planning to work on. And when I say we plan to work on, we really do two things. One is really transactional side, right? So we really provide guarantees to cover the risks of global banks to transact in derivatives and repo markets in Uzbekistan. So we cover legal, credit, counterparty risk, and so on and so forth. So basically, we have a capitalized entity by the international finance institutions that I mentioned in one of my first slide, and we use this capital basically to absorb risks. That's a sort of commercial transactional part. But secondly, a lot of the items I was mentioning in the circle of impediments are not really just a matter of credit risk that Uzbekistan or a specific bank or Uzbekistani bond is risky. It's just entirely of a structural nature, such as are certain agreements enforceable, or can you open certain types of accounts? So for that, we actually provide a technical assistance, which is paid typically not from our balance sheet. It's paid also by our donors, the ones I was mentioning beginning, and other ones, which basically those development institutions tell us, please go and do the soft work that is needed to make derivatives and repo market happen, not just provide guarantees, but do other work. So I'll briefly mention both of those. So on the transaction side, and again, I will not, given the time limitation, go through all of those things, although I always welcome questions at the end, and the presentation will be posted. But basically, there are various ways how Frank Lira, which is a circle here, and the various things stays in the middle between, let's say, beneficiary bank as a lender and an obligor bank, which is Uzbekistani bank, right? So we provide a guarantee. We can just provide a guarantee, and two parties can transact with each other. And we absorb those risks by guarantee, or instead we can be in the middle of the transactions, or it can be even a multi-party structure, or even the two banks which we guarantee can be entirely in Uzbekistan, and each of those of course situation applies to different situations. Maybe I'll mention just one of them, really intermediation transaction, in a slightly more detail from our experience in Uzbekistan in the last few months. There is clearly a lack of local currency funding, if anything, right? There is probably more demand for Uzbek soms and dollars, And often, if actually Uzbek currency UZS is attracted from abroad, sorry, apologies, if dollars are attracted from abroad, in reality, the obligor, the Bank of Uzbekistan finally want to do on lending in local currency. So then there is a need to convert this funding, to convert this liability from dollars to local currency. Now, around what is on the left side, beneficiaries and global banks, there are some parties in the world who are willing to take currency risk, yeah, or just really do a carry trade to invest in UZS, or just, you know, really participate in this derivatives market. But very often, for a lot of structural, credit risk, legal, operational, and other reasons, they find it very difficult really to directly transact with obligor, which is a Bank of Uzbekistan. So in that sense, Frankclear provides intermediation for those transactions by being in the middle. So basically, we could do UZS, USD, typically NDF or NDCCS, which stands for non-deliverable forward or non-deliverable cross-currency swap, with a bank here, and then turn around, do it with a global bank. And typically there is, of course, collateral involved in terms of bonds or cash, and that can stay in Frankclear account, or it can go to all the way to the account of the global bank. There are various sort of flavors and ways to do it, but at the end of the day, the really underlying idea is to provide really the obligor final economic liability in sum. And this can also be provided combined with a funding transaction, with a repo. You can do both repos in dollar to attract dollar fundings, and then put this kind of non-deliverable forward on top of that, resulting in Uzbekistan some funding finally for Uzbekistan banks. So we do these transactions. Of course, there is a commercial element in it. If we're here in the middle, we earn fees. So we generally aim to earn fair return on our capitals that we are provided. But important reason why we do it is to try to do the first transactions in the market, because by doing this, by trying to sign this non-deliverable forwards and swaps and these, there will be probably all the issues in Uzbekistan potential that I mentioned, and probably 20 more to be found, and that's fine. We are happy generally to put disproportional effort to develop market and work on the first transactions. But maybe I'll just mention, but then it goes to our second part of the work, which is technical assistance. Usually by us doing a transaction, we deeper learn what is really works well or not well on the market, and then we could offer various forms of technical assistance, which is typically free for the market. That can include trainings on repos, on derivatives. It could be legal and regulatory reform, for example, if ISDA or GMRA agreements are not working. We could work with the regulators to make it work. We have experience of doing it in Mongolia, Armenia, Georgia, sometimes with us only, sometimes with the BRD partnering with us, which basically resulted in all these agreements enforceable there. Similarly, on clearing, settlement, custody, bond holdings, bond transfers, we also have experience doing it. And yeah, that is sort of really how, I guess, practical guarantee transaction and this kind of technical assistant help to the market hopefully results in those transactions becoming more and more smooth. I will not go through our transaction structure much, but yeah, we're doing transactions up to about 50 million, maybe important to mention. And maturity tenors is a money market segment, so not a long-term segment, but money market segment of about 6-18 months, maybe slightly longer. And you can, of course, ask me questions on those details after reviewing the presentation. I was mentioning that we haven't closed yet a transaction here, but we are very much oriented towards frontier and difficult markets, and I would argue maybe even some more difficult than Uzbekistan, and more frontiers and smaller. So we have closed transactions in Mongolia, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Ghana, in Kenya, that are mentioned here. But also we have done transactions in larger markets such as Nigeria or Egypt, but I guess our heart really lies in development money markets in frontier spaces where it's difficult for foreigners, for global banks to go there and share the liquidity and do business. So with that, I'll stop. I'll leave the last slide with my contact information. You're welcome to chat me either now during Q&A or later. And of course, there will be Q&A session. You feel free to ask questions. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei, for your presentation. I hope we can share your presentation on our website and then your contacts
please, yeah.
as well. I see one question to you regarding the stock exchange, the commodity transactions. As I know, so far there is no commodity-related instruments on the local stock exchange. It's mostly the shares of the bank, but probably you have or some other participants of our webinar have more information about this commodity exchange transaction on the Uzbek stock exchange.
Honestly, I don't know. Yeah, the commodities is really not per se part of the market. What our really focus is really bank to bank lending, and by bank to bank I mean not only Uzbek bank but of course global banks doing transaction here. And typically those happens on the back of government bonds around the world. That's what we try to promote. So maybe I'll leave the questions to others.
Yeah,
if they have any comment on this.
Yeah, basically we already have quite interesting chat, so everyone can read it. And I would like to give a microphone to Mr. Kahorov, because there is many questions to you, and I just would like to, and you are answering already them in the chat, thank you very much. And I just would like to summarize topics. So the price policy about the privatization, the private-public partnerships, the due diligence and audit of state-owned enterprises, and the main question I think for everyone is the allowance to buy shares of the listed banks on the local stock exchange. So these topics, could you comment on it also?
Yeah, of course. On the price matter, we have introduced the new valuation standards, and I think these standards will calculate the real price of the assets based on international practice, international standards of valuation. But also we are in some cases doing individual approach for some large enterprises and attracting investment banks, foreign and local as well, to do the valuation, to do as a financial advisors of our agency. So I think the unreal price of the state assets will not be in future, because we are improving the legislation on this file. And what can I say? I think, yeah.
And regarding the due diligence and hiring external consultancy for the improving the corporate governance.
Regarding in consultants, we have already practiced with many of the consultants, including Big Four. For example, on privatization of chemical sector, we have attracted EY as a advisor on one of the biggest enterprises in food industry is Coca-Cola, and we have attracted Rothschild and Legals as well. So we are planning to work with them together closely on the implementation of privatization program for 2025, which will be adopted soon. And we are open and we are ready to work with them.
And also, I see the question about the investment banks, so local and foreign. What's your cooperation with them for attracting capital to the state-owned enterprises?
So we have many plans. For example, which we have developed the state draft of the state privatization program. Refers that some kind of small enterprises will be sold very soon without any preparation, without any improving, and some kind of middle and large enterprises will be prepared for sale. So we need the help of investment banks, foreigners, especially because our local market can offer some services, but they are not they can meet our needs right now. So we will attract by tenders the investment bank from our foreign partners. And what else? So I think they should look some latest news on the activity of agency, on the investment company, which is called as Uzassets, because Uzassets is the new company, the activity of which is directed to work with international our partners, investment banks, and we are running the big privatization process through the Uzassets investment company. And Sama also every moment is ready to work with our partners.
Great, and I see the last question. Probably we can also comment on it, but first of all, I would like to combine the last pair of questions for you, Mr. Kahorov. So let us know the information about the efficiency of the corporate governance, because as I know, there is a new legislation to make the management and the workers of state-owned enterprises to work more efficiency, to increase efficiency of the state-owned enterprises. And also at the same time, we definitely know there is a debt of state-owned enterprises, which should be ideally included to the overall government debt. However, as we know, that's a lot of guarantees from the government to state-owned enterprises. How these two problems are going to be solved, so the efficiency of the management and then the direct or indirect debt of state-owned enterprises.
Okay, we are trying to do improvement in some areas of corporate governance and in some areas of state-owned enterprise activity. So we are trying to attract more independent members to the boards. We will all our joint stock companies will run the IFRS from the 1st January of 2021. So we are doing a lot. We are introducing in all enterprises the best principles of corporate governance. Many documents in the activity of this structures, such as local acts on to organize their activity more openly, more attractively. So regarding the debts, we are working. We have debts in some of our large state-owned enterprises, and there are from internal sources and external sources of fundings. So as, maybe you know, we are doing the reforms in many of economical sectors. For example, these reforms were already implemented on aviation sector. We have divided into three parts: Uzbekistan Airways National Company. We did reforms in the oil and gas industry, and we are planning to do the same in telecommunication, in railway sector. So the approach will be individually to all of these state-owned enterprises, and step by step.
Thank you very much. We see that there is a lot of questions, some questions left, but I hope we will have all contacts of our today's speakers and all presentation, and we, with allowance, we can share it with you. Thank you, Mr. Kahorov. And I see the question to Andrei Shinkevich about I think about your this deal and legal opinion about the netting, which is according to our listener is not possible in Uzbekistan. So could you comment on it?
Yeah, no, indeed, as I was saying, netting and legal opinion is something that prevents, global banks such as, I don't know, Goldman Sachs, Societe Generale, Credit Suisse to transact directly. And we're working now on the legal opinion. I wouldn't say it is it's not entirely black and white situation. So definitely Uzbekistan is not at the stage that ISDA would issue a clean netting opinion and then the all global bank can just go ahead and work here, but it is not as negative as it is impossible to do it. There are certain legal risks, and certain modifications of ISDA and certain structuring efforts are needed to make this transaction possible. And of course, in any case, you need to, I guess, higher appetite for legal risks, which so yeah, at the end of the day, we are happy to we currently go through the process of structuring and approving a transaction. We would like to hope that we will be able to take the netting risk as it is now and be in the middle. But in the long term, definitely Uzbekistan needs to do some legal reforms to make it possible to work with a wider investor base, not just Frankclear.
Thank you very much, Andrei. I see that's basically we are almost done with the questions, almost lack of time. And last point, we have here the representative of basically Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Nuriddin. So could you comment on visa issue specifically because you know the right information?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vladimir, for the question. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to all speakers, to all the participants. And of course, legal visa issues for the foreign investors, business people is very important. And indeed, we have, there are three types of visa for the business representatives. One of the, first of all, is short-term visa. It is till 1 year, and you can apply it through the consulate of the Uzbekistan and abroad, and you need just the invitation from your partner, of course. And second one, above mentioned one of the speakers, about the business investors visa. It is long-term visa and till 3 years, and for this type of the visa you need of course some obligations for the assets. I mean, you have to buy some assets in Uzbekistan, for example, till $200,000 in price of $200,000. And third one is the invest visa for the people who are buying assets in price of more than 3 million US dollars. And it is also the long-term visa, and you will get 10 years permanent residency in Uzbekistan for yourself and for your family, indeed. And you can need all the rights in Uzbekistan, for example, for the education, for the healthcare, and something else like Uzbek people in Uzbekistan, if you will get this type of the visa. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Nuriddin. So we are already about to close our webinar. As usual, all materials from the permission of the speakers will be soon available on our website. Then we will have a recording, and this recording will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. If you have any specific question to some of our speakers, please contact us, or during the next days or weeks, we will share just the contacts of all speakers for today. So the next webinar of our company in English will be 23rd of September. So basically next week, and this will be dedicated to the sustainable finance in Georgia. So for the market practitioners, it's very interesting who is interested in the sustainable finance. And I would like at the end to say thank you very much for all speakers, and thank you very much for all listeners of today's webinar, and hope to see you in the future on our sovereign and sustainability webinars online, and hope offline at some point. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
And bye, everyone.
Yeah.